I must say I am a fan of yours, Stephanie. I spent months and months reading everything you wrote ever.
Wow.
Because I was so enamored by your brilliance. In fact, I even called my niece, Dr. Tracy Hammond, and said, "Can you?" Because she was a MIT graduate after she got her other Ph.D. at Columbia, and I said, "Can you find her number? I've got to talk to this woman," but I never made it to call you, so I must
I'm so
apologize.
thrilled to meet you. I have to say it's a mutual love-in because you have exactly the same message that I have to the world about how toxicity of all the drugs we're being prescribed is killing us and, cardiovascular disease. I'm totally on the same page with you. It's really exciting to meet a fellow warrior, and you're very prolific. I'm impressed with all of your books. And
well, I'll give you a little background. I'm no smarter than any other doctor, as you probably figured out. I was just sicker. I had over 24 incurable things that are still considered by today's standards incurable. Bottom line, I'm 76. I don't even have gray hair. Most people think I'm in my late 50s. I play tennis, and I have no medicines, no symptoms. I died when I was 70 of something that's never been seen in a living person, only on the autopsy table, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on and on. I'll probably put it in the next book. But anyway.
Wow.
I
I really appreciate people who get sick and then study their disease. Because there's so much stuff on the web, and you can learn a lot. You have to sort through it and be careful to discriminate. But you can totally educate yourself just by reading the web, Yeah. If you're sick and you're looking for a solution and the doctors don't have any idea what's going on, you've got to get on the web and figure it out for yourself or you're not going to live,
I know, but the thing is, even in the last year, I've devoured over 24 books by all the keto guys, the cardiologists, the nephrologists, endocrinologists, you name it, oncologists. More people have written about that. And yet every single one has one thing in common. They all work blindly. They do not measure the 34 fatty acids, and that's what they're trying to change. They have no idea what a normal is or what the people look like who've done it. So that's what we're starting to look at now.
The fats are so complicated. I haven't been able to crack that code. Every time I try to read more about the fatty acids, I get lost again.
Well, the thing is,
really
I'm blessed because in many, many ways, I think God just said, I got to pick some dumbass physician and make her drop her to her knees and make her really sick and then get her to start reading this stuff because what we found was that, we look at a 11-page assay in people, and it includes their 34 fatty acids, and most people who are sick, and even a lot of people who think they're well, and it's a beautiful lead into, now you can rescue yourself before you even get a symptom. They're literally starving for the right fatty acids and choked with the wrong ones.
That's interesting.
And those omega-6s, of course, loaded with the glyphosate and
Yeah,
and then
I've often wondered to what extent when people do studies on fat that they mess up the study totally by having different amounts of glyphosate in the food. Because if you're comparing fat A with fat B, and fat A has glyphosate and fat B doesn't, that's going to be a major...
Well, that's part of the problem with all of the keto studies where they tried to damn the high-fat diets, because if you look at the diet, the normal rat chow, in fact, we're putting all this in the next book, and we'll be putting it in the newsletters and stuff, too, with all the references, because I'm a reference junkie like you.
Yeah.
If you look at those studies, they start the rats out with 58 to 65% carbo, and it never changes. Then all they do is change the fat from 5% to 25 or 30 or whatever they're going to call high-fat diet. So all they've proven is that giving rats the standard high-carbo diet and then adding in a junk fat makes them worse and gives them insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome and endothelial dysfunction and anything else you want to call it, mitochondrial dysfunction.
I've seen so many papers where they say, we put the fats on a high-fat diet and they got cardiovascular disease. or diabetes or something. But I've always been frustrated that they don't exactly say which fat.
Well, if you dig deep, they always have to go back, and that's how I got all this stats. The standard rat chow is anywhere from 58 to 65. Do you ever read, I've been devouring it for years. It's my favorite journal, Environmental Health Perspectives, and Journal of Nutritional Biochemistry.
Mm-hmm, yeah, I've read both of those papers.
And they'll give you all that data. But anyway, so with this 11-page assay, over the last few years, we've seen an elevation of arsenic. And I thought, okay, well, they showed that arsenic was in the rice, and they showed, we've shown that arsenic is in the chickens because of the lice powder that they put on that they spray on the outside so that they don't peck each other's feathers off and give each other infections because they're grown so closely together on those grates. And but it wasn't that. It was the, quote, inerts of Roundup.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you
Roundup
search
had arsenic in it. I mean, I've seen papers talk about arsenic in Roundup. I think.
Yeah. Have you seen the POEA data?
Yeah, I know POEA is really toxic. I know that. Seralini, well, you know Seralini, right? I don't know how familiar you are with all the Roundup papers, but Seralini is the lead author on a lot of papers on Roundup. His paper was actually the first one I read if you've heard any of my videos, I always talk about hearing this 2-hour lecture by Don Huber and having an epiphany. And then after that, the first paper I read was Seralini's long-term study that had gotten retracted and then republished, where he had exposed these rats to low-dose Roundup over their entire lifespan and showed all kinds of problems that they developed eventually, although in the first 3 months they were okay. That paper really blew my mind and got me started on glyphosate. But he has since kind of changed his tune. Seralini himself is now claiming that glyphosate itself is not really toxic, and he's wrong about that. I know he's wrong about that. So that's a mistake he's making that I'm very...
They may have threatened him with lawsuits or something.
I actually think that's what happened, because I talked to him shortly before he changed his mind. We had like a 1-hour conversation. I was trying to convince him that glyphosate is substituting for glycine, and that's why it's so toxic, And he wouldn't budge. He didn't think so. He thought, no, that's not possible. They're all balking on this idea. You know my story about glycine substitution, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, because that...
Entropy 2013, all that.
Yeah, I've written a couple papers now on that. More than 2, but 2 with Anthony Sansel and then some other papers with some other people, but in extremely obscure journals, of course, because I can't publish in the mainstream. They locked me out. But anyway... I think that's the reason why glyphosate itself is so toxic, and it's subtle, it's insidious, it's cumulative, so it doesn't show up acutely, and you don't see it when you do acute studies. It's something that happens slow. So you miss it altogether if you do acute studies. He had told me...
we measure everybody's glycine levels, et cetera.
Yeah, well, it's not just
glycine, serine, threonine, et cetera.
It's going to be glyphosate contaminating into the protein, which is hard to see. But anyway, he had talked to me and had said at that time when we had this 1-hour discussion that all of his funding was shutting down and he wasn't going to be able to do any more research. He didn't have any money. He was telling me all of that. And then he went back, and after that he started saying, oh, yeah, glyphosate's not toxic. So I do think you're right. He was told, if you can just pitch on those other ingredients and talk about those and sort of downplay glyphosate, we'll give you money. I think that's what happened. Now, he hasn't confirmed that. That's just my guess, but... There's a lot of politics involved in what people work.
Oh, we know that. I mean, every time there's some cockamamie article in the Wall Street and they totally miss, the actual cause and cure of everything, which is what our focus is, I'll write, a very concise 1-paragraph thing with all the references, et cetera. They have never published them. Never.
Yeah, I know. It's so frustrating, isn't it? They just lock us out. I mean, it's such a sad situation that we're in right now, with everybody being poisoned. But you're right that the arsenic is maybe a crucial thing. And arsenic is in Roundup, and Seralini, I believe, was one of the key people who showed that.
Well, then they had that other neat study, I think it was he, but maybe not, where they actually showed the photographs of the plants. And they gave them just the glyphosate, and the plants didn't die. And then they gave them the whole deal with the inerts, and they crumpled right up.
Right. Yeah. Well, see, that's what happens. When Roundup works a lot better than glyphosate by itself, first of all, because the other ingredients encourage glyphosate to be taken up by the cells, so that's important. Otherwise, it just kind of stays out and they don't get in trouble. But also, the other ingredients are very toxic in and of themselves, so they stun the plant. They really knock it hard right away at the beginning, and then the plant is struggling to get itself going again. It picks up all that glyphosate, puts it into all of its proteins, and then it just collapses, So it's a fast hit followed by a slow kill is how it works, I think.
So is arsenic...
But the glycine analog is just horrendous. I'm a computer scientist, and I love sort of data and codes and stuff like that, and there's just a beautiful story that's emerging with respect to codes in proteins and sequences of amino acids that are susceptible to glyphosate substitution. Is very, very interesting. Certain proteins and certain spots in those proteins that have certain functions, those are the places where, I have a very specific view of how glyphosate is messing up proteins, and it's really fascinating. And it hooks into all kinds of extremely important proteins that get broken, and then they cause all these diseases that are going up dramatically in step with glyphosate usage.
Well, that brings us to...
a really good match. Yeah. Huh?
Well, as I've always maintained, right now you can create any chronic disease, and that's why we lead the world in chronic diseases. We're number 43 in health, but number 1 in expensive medical care system. Mm-hmm. And these are JAMA stats, so they're really up to date. Anyway, you can create, as you know, and you've shown so beautifully, you can create any disease with enough Roundup. And then as we showed, as Dufault showed, the mercury high fructose corn syrup, when I wrote How to Cure Diabetes, mm-hmm. I couldn't figure out why there were so many papers that said they could just create diabetes in rats for experiments, just giving them high fructose corn syrup. And then she beautifully showed, she was in the EPA, NIH, FDA, she was in the Army, she's been in everything. And it was the mercury in it. And when we went through, I've lectured with Oxford, et cetera, and with many dentists over the years. And when we went through their statistics of how much mercury you get from an amalgam, and then hers, the average consumption of high fructose corn syrup gives the average person the amount of mercury you would have if you had 1 new mercury amalgam every day of your life. And
Whoa,
this is documented in the last 5 years of TW.
In the cavities, huh?
Yeah.
Wow,
I put all the stats on that. And then if you want to go further, because I had tremendous chemical sensitivity years ago, and that's what launched me into this. If you just look at the phthalates, which I devoured ad nauseum in Detoxify or Die, they can create everything, from diabetes to Alzheimer's, cancers, autism, because it damages another fundamental step, beta oxidation in the mitochondria. So it creates arrhythmias, heart failure, etc. It damages the detox, the carnitine, you name it. And if you want to then go further, you have Roundup that can cause every disease. You have mercury loaded high fructose corn syrup, which can create every disease. I think it's part of our osteoarthritis epidemic. I'm pretty sure of it. And then you have the phthalates that are the number 1 pollutant in the human body that can create any disease. And then, as I showed in a published paper, and then I think it was in this year's newsletter, if you just follow the enzymes from one mineral that we see low in people all the time, zinc, then you see that you have poisoned delta-5 desaturase, so you can't convert your fatty acids. You've poisoned DNA polymerase, so you can't protect the genes once you take them apart and put them back together. You can't reduce the quinolinate, which is a sign of early brain deterioration before a person has any symptoms, because you can't convert B6 to its active form, pyridoxal 5-phosphate. You can't improve insulin-degrading enzyme because you don't have enough zinc. You can't convert beta-carotene to vitamin A, and on it goes, the carbonic anhydride.
Just looking at zinc deficiency.
Yeah, and then you were talking about the sequences of amino
I'll tell
acids.
you something. Actually, glyphosate drives zinc into the liver and deprives the rest of the body.
Yeah, because those are the zinc fingers.
Just with glyphosate.
Right, when the amino acids grab on to their structures to create the messages that they want to send, they're called the zinc fingers, as you know, and without enough zinc, it's totally messed up message. And so it goes on. And then if you add in, the 7M that we talked about this year, the trans fatty acids, oh my gosh, just so much. Well, the medications, the statins, the PPIs, and then
protein pump inhibitors.
And it just goes on. And then everybody's loaded with candida in their gut usually, and that's half the immune system, half the detox. It's called the second brain. It's a miracle that people are doing as well as they are.
I think so too. That's what I've been thinking. It's incredible, isn't it? Wow. Yeah. Oh, you're a walking encyclopedia. I'm very impressed. I mean,
well, I think we have one thing in common, and that is, well, several things. But I think that my focus is I don't want to be a widow. And so my focus is trying to make sure that my husband stays healthy.
Yeah, I sort of have a similar goal. Yes. You may know. I mean, I started this whole thing with the statin drug, and my husband, I've told that story. You probably know.
No, I don't know that one.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, because he was diagnosed with very suddenly with blocked artery in his. He had a sort of emergency situation about maybe 12, 13 years ago, where they
LAD.
They discovered he had a blockage in his LAD. He didn't even know he had heart disease. He had diabetes. He's had diabetes for a long time, type 2. But then it was a sudden thing. They diagnosed on Wednesday. He was in on Friday. We didn't even have time to research, and they said, which kind of stent do you want? They didn't give us an option. Do you want a stent? Whereas it turns out that he didn't really need one, but they put one in, medicated stent or something, and then they put him on this high-dose statin, 4 times the normal dosage, and they told him he'd have to take that for the rest of his life, That was just absolutely necessary, otherwise he would die. And I knew statins were bad because I hated them already because I knew cholesterol was so important. I couldn't believe the idea to knock out your cholesterol. So I immediately started doing all this research on the statin drugs. And he, of course, immediately started getting all kinds of nasty symptoms. And so I just harassed him. And we had big fights and everything. It was a really rough year.
I know, sure. What could you know when all of these highfalutin cardiologists told him differently?
Yeah, I know. I said, you can't take it. You absolutely can't take it. And his cardiologist was like, if you take any less than 4 times the normal dosage, I will no longer be your doctor. So
that's right. They fired a lot of our readers. They've already been fired by the cardiologist. Lucky for them.
Well, so I came to his appointment armed with all these papers on statins showing how toxic they were in my briefcase, and he was saying, you have to take this. And I said, well, I have some material here. Maybe you'd be interested. And he said, no, that won't be necessary. He didn't even want to look at these papers.
Did he? You never gave him the cholesterol hoax?
No, I read it though. But I was so mad. And Victor actually was at that point convinced also that he didn't want to take a statin. I'd been, of course, piling him with information as well, and I was showing him all the symptoms he was having, and they were related to the symptoms you're supposed to have when you have statins. He finally decided he needed to get off, and he took a really long time. He was very slow. He was very methodical, and worked it
What's his
down.
Recent coronary calcium score?
Oh, gosh, I don't know.
You should, because that's an important thing now to follow that.
I know that's an important thing, because that is increased by statin drugs.
Yes. And, well, we just recently had a guy who plays tennis every day, 74, and no symptoms, no medicines. And he's one of the readers. And I was following his coronary. He sent his recent coronary calcium score, and I said, you have to have immediate bypass surgery. He said, Sherry, you're nuts. I play tennis. I just played yesterday. It's 85 degrees here. It's hot. I feel wonderful. No medicine. I said, you've got, and you're going to have to show. I'll dictate everything that you need to say to them, and you write it down, and you go in, and you hold your position. He had to talk to 5 cardiologists before one said, all right, I'll do a cardiac cath, but she's nuts. When they did it, they came running into his wife and said, oh, my gosh, his LAD is 99% occluded. We don't know how to do it. Because what we've seen is when people do the nutrients, they also develop collateral circulation that doesn't give the normal symptoms that they're looking for. They want you to be down and out, huffing and puffing when you walk in with swollen legs and all the signs of heart failure. They don't get it, that you can be totally normal looking. So make sure that you see, and I would get the cardio-ion with an expert interpretation, 11 pages of all of his chemistry, because that'll show you. And then in the last 2 years, we've done in the newsletter as well the crystal ball test, depending upon a person's history. For example, the D-dimer will show if you're silently clotting and nobody knows it. And, of course, the Eliquis and everything, they don't even have a test for those. That's why there isn't any test. That's why you don't they say, oh, you don't have to bother getting your blood work tested to see if it's working, because it doesn't work in 2/3 of the people, and they don't even know it because they don't have anything to measure it with. But then the PLA2 shows if you have soft plaque, because the coronary calcium score only shows the hard plaque, the calcified plaque, and telopeptide, et cetera, shows if you're pulling calcium out of the bone and dumping it into the heart, the brain, et cetera. So there's so much cool stuff in the last 5 years of the newsletters and the different books, because you want to make sure that he is good.
Yeah, he's doing very well, which is great.
Well, so was this other guy. But
that's true. He got all of his diabetes medications, I think, just by eating well.
Sure.
He managed to completely prune himself of diabetes medications. He's still getting good numbers on his blood sugar, so we're really happy about that.
I think we're going to see more and more people with MCS which can mimic anything. I mean, some people just have exhaustion, or some people just have the brain fog.
Sensitivity, right? You're talking
I mean, they can have anything and everything, and we're going to see more and more of this nebulous stuff.
I think so too. Yeah. I mean, we're seeing all kinds of interesting diseases. It's certainly a field day for people who are interested in disease, isn't it? I mean, there's just so many bizarre things that are happening.
Yeah, but if you look at, I've been practicing 50 years, and if you look at diseases, there's only 2 causes for all diseases. The nutrient levels go down, the toxicity levels go up.
Oh, I completely agree with you.
And there's only one cause of death. You stop making electrons. If I were suddenly dead in front of you, I'm the same chemicals, the same nutrients, the same toxins, but the electricity stopped.
Yeah, interesting. And I like that point of view. That seems very logical. Of course, I'm also very much about the electrical system of the body and the important role of sulfate in maintaining the electrical system.
Well, we measure the sulfate, plus we, of course, encourage them to look at the intracellular molybdenum, which is in the enzyme sulfite oxidase, et cetera.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's crucial. And that's a very critical enzyme that I think is being affected by glyphosate in the gut, and possibly by other things. I don't know if you know of anything that's affecting it, like mercury or something. I don't know.
It's everything. It's a minefield.
Yeah. Because sulfite oxidase is very interesting, and when you see the overgrowth of desulfovibrio and other sulfur-reducing bacteria in the gut, which is associated with autism, that's a good indicator that sulfite oxidase is defective.
But then they don't. Then the peds don't go and measure. I ended up, because I was so sick, I ended up with 4 specialties, and the peds don't measure anything, just like everybody else. You'd think they would.
Oh. Absolutely. There's so much. I suspect it's partly because they don't understand how to interpret, right?
Right.
They never were taught how to interpret the measures. So then if they get some numbers, they don't know what they mean, and they don't feel they're useful for that reason. Or they don't have any
I would love to find
numbers, right?
Pardon me?
It frustrates me that they're so obsessed on testing for cholesterol, and they don't test for things like elevated homocysteine is a much higher risk factor for.
All right. Well, and the other thing is cholesterol is merely a Band-Aid. That's all. It's just a Band-Aid. It's just it's a messenger. And they always shoot the messenger because they don't know what else to do. Well, you know how the cholesterol...
Right? They have a drug that lowers cholesterol. Yeah. So they can convince you that it's bad to have high cholesterol.
That makes more in 1 year than 4 times the FDA annual budget.
Wow, that is incredible.
Yeah. Well, you know how the cholesterol got started. 50 years ago, they said, oh, wait, people are dying of heart attacks. And when we do autopsies, the arteries are plugged up. So let's see what those plugs are made out of. They're made out of cholesterol. Okay, that's the bad guy. That's like saying, oh, every time you go to a fire, you find firemen, so they must have caused it. And every time you go to a crime, you see policemen, so they must have caused it. And that's how it permeated and stayed for the last 50 years.
Right. I agree.
Because then the food manufacturers got in and said, well, we can, now that the agrarian society has moved because of the Industrial Revolution into the cities, we need to make food last longer, so we're going to hydrogenate the oils and blah, blah. And there we have it. And then, of course, the Lipitor.
Fat, it keeps better, right? Low-fat foods keep longer. Don't spoil as quickly as high-fat foods, I think. I don't know if that's true. You're not agreeing, so maybe that's not
No. Actually, I render some of our own fat from hogs that we get from local friends. And you can have that in the refrigerator for months. It doesn't go bad.
Yeah, actually, I know. It's true that pure fat keeps a very long time.
Yeah.
But in fact, we use lard also. We use organic lard as our main oil, which we don't get from a local farmer, but we order it somewhere. That's our favorite oil, which surprises people with someone with heart disease,
Oh, I know. They think you're nuts.
Yeah.
Well, you ought to check his fatty acids.
Yeah,
Cardio Iron.
Yeah.
Just go to, it's in our book, How to Cure Diabetes, to order your own, because a lot of doctors don't even know what the test is, and they won't order anything that they don't know what it is.
So you can actually do that without a doctor giving you.
Yes, you can go to directlabs.com. That's what our readers in 24 countries do. They go there, they scroll down to Metametrics Cardio Iron, they get the test, then you call Genova Labs, you get the kit, and then you schedule with a local lab, make sure that they're cool with doing another lab's work, because they often are not. They only want to promote their own thing.
Yeah. And it involves a blood test, right?
Blood and urine.
Oh, blood and urine.
You bring your frozen urine when you go, yeah. But it's 11 pages. It's the best test. It's the best single test I've seen in 50 years of medicine. And I'm not connected with the lab in any way. They don't even know who I am, because they think I don't order any, because everybody goes to Direct Labs or their doctor. So, anyway.
Interesting. Yeah.
Could I ask a question for your opinion?
Sure.
Yeah.
One thing I've been hearing a lot lately, and it makes a certain amount of sense, is that in addition to the denatured food, which is an obvious problem, if you're eating garbage, it's not going to do your body well. But that things like mercury and glyphosate and all the other heavy metals create a favorable environment for the molds and the limes and the other pathogens, and then that creates the further deficiencies in nutrition, because you have the molds eating the stuff that you should be eating and creating toxic waste that then has to be eliminated at great biochemical expense.
But don't forget, Ken, when like something like mercury comes into the intestines, it sits in an enzyme and kicks out zinc, for example. So now the enzyme does not vibrate, oscillate, resonate in the way that it should. Chemical molecules in the body and in living structures are not sitting there like dumbbells. They're actually vibrating thousands of times a second, some of them. And when the electricity is gone, the mechanism of the enzyme is destroyed, and then it creates disease. Does that make more sense?
It does, yes. It does. And
I do agree with you, Ken, that certainly glyphosate causes yeast infection. I feel pretty confident. I even understand how that works. It related to a particular enzyme that gets destroyed by glyphosate. This is
which one do you think? I'd like to know.
PEPCK.
Okay.
And that may not be one you're familiar with, because it's not talked about a lot. But
I call it PEP, because I never can say the phosphoenol phosphate, whatever.
Carboxykinase.
Yes.
The last part, the CK.
Yeah.
Look up that enzyme, because it is so fascinating. That enzyme's defective behavior because of glyphosate can explain a huge list of conditions, very specifically, that are going up right now, like type 1 diabetes and sudden infant death syndrome, neonatal hypoglycemia, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, yeast overgrowth, oxalate problems. All of those can be explained by that one enzyme. And that enzyme has a binding site for PEP that's very similar to the binding site for PEP that's in EPSP synthase, which is famously disrupted enzyme in the shikimate pathway. In other words, the EPSP synthase is a model for which kinds of enzymes would glyphosate likely disrupt. And the other one, PEPCK, has exactly the same setup. It binds PEP at a site where glycine is highly conserved, and there are these positively charged amino acids that hold the phosphate in place. They also hold the phosphonate of glyphosate in place and encourage glyphosate to substitute for glycine at that spot. That's what I think is happening.
Oh, that's cool, because the above and beyond then, the glyphosate causing candida, then of course we have the ubiquitous antibiotics, and then we have the phthalates, which certainly explain why there's such a high rate of autism, because those babies are weaned on phthalates. Their bottles, the nipples, the formula, everything. Life begins with plastic with them. And then once the candida overgrows, as we showed in Chapter 4 on How to Cure Diabetes, we never leave anybody out when we write a book, even though you don't have diabetes. Has things that everybody needs to know. That candida creates thyroid antibodies, which don't just go to the thyroid, they go to the brain and cause Hashimoto's encephalitis and can deteriorate the brain. They create an enzyme called thiaminase, B1, deficiency is caused. So now you have elevated pyruvates and lactates, so you have the fibromyalgia-type symptoms and body aches. They create leaky gut or intestinal hyperpermeability, and that's where you get autoimmune disease. And really, everything is autoimmune, even the cancers. You measure them with antibodies, the PSA, the CA125, etc.
Yeah, interesting. Is autoimmune disease is an epidemic.
Is dealing with phthalates mainly an issue of avoidance?
No. And Detoxifier Dye shows you how you have to get rid of them. And you have to do it frequently, like 3 weeks, a month or so. You have to do a lot. People who are serious about getting rid of what they do is first get a cardioion so they can see what deficiencies they have and what toxicities they have. And then you fix the detox pathways. Because if you just start detoxing, and I've consulted with many people who went to some guy who said, oh, I'm a chelation specialist, I'm going to detox you, etc. They lay them out in lavender. They can make them much worse. So first you do the cardioion and you see what's missing, what's broken. And then you do the detoxifier dye, phthalate detoxification. Then you go to the high blood pressure hoax and you do the suppositories that are safer, cheaper, done at home, better than IV chelation, which loads you up with more phthalates.
I've been very nervous about chelation.
Yeah, you don't want to do it when you can do the suppositories that are in the high blood pressure hoax. That protocol.
Oh wow, you've got it all worked out, huh?
I do not want to be a widow.
So your husband's doing well?
Yeah. We're all tennis players, so we.
Yeah. Wow. That's great. That's really amazing.
So can I ask a related question? If you've got candida or some other mold or Lyme, it's also eating and disrupting nutrients, yeah?
Yeah, but see, that brings us back. I've consulted with so many people. You know, some people have spent like $65,000 on IV home IVs in a year with these Lyme guys, and because when I do the consults on people in 24 countries, our readers, as you know, Ken, I always look at their last 3 years of records from all their doctors so that I can get a real good, takes me an hour or two, real good handle on their chemistry, and then I have their cardioion as well, which I go over with them. It takes about an hour. And then we can see why the person had endless Lyme, because they're all working blindly again. They don't know that they have no vitamin D. Their level is 40, which is considered, quote, normal, but it's not normal for getting rid of Lyme or heart disease or high blood pressure or anything else. And, you know, it brings us back to the acronym that I always like to use. When people are stuck and they cannot figure out how to get well, think, T-H-I-N-K, toxins, hormones, intestines, nutrient deficiencies, and knowledge gaps, and you'll always find it.
That's very nice. That's really nice. That's a good acronym.
Let me bring up something
Lyme,
go ahead.
Lyme depends on manganese. It really loves manganese. It doesn't use iron at all. I find that really interesting. I don't know if you've made anything out of that, but...
Well, we just look to see, you know, it's the SOD, driver in the mitochondria. And, of course, we look at the fatty acids and the mitochondrial oxidation, the succinates, the malates, et cetera. And because if you look at, if you read thousands of biochemistry journals, as you and I have, they call the fundamental basis of disease inflammation. No, it's metabolic syndrome. No, it's mitochondrial dysfunction. No, it's insulin resistance. No, it's all those things. You call it whatever you want, but they're working blindly because they don't know what is actually underlying it, and everybody is individual.
Yeah. Well, different individual ways to fail, I think.
Yeah.
We're all failing. It's a matter of biology, of different genetics, or different...
Oh, it would be cool, too, if you know any researchers, on the phthalates, they are such a ubiquitous, unavoidable toxin that even the polar bears in the Arctic have measurable levels, and they have human diseases now, hypothyroidism, osteoporosis. It would be cool to see if you have any of the Roundup metabolites in there.
Right, yes, that would be.
I have a question that might lead to some controversy. Vitamin D. Now, I know, Dr. Seneff, you're a big believer in sunlight.
Yes.
And Dr. Rogers, you are a big believer and have a lot of faith in vitamin D supplementation. Can you talk a little bit about that, and also the levels that you suggest are high given the quote standard?
Well, the standard says 30 to 100. Was it nanogram per deciliter? Is normal, and those were determined decades ago on. You have to remember, Ken, that years ago when blood tests were first brought into the medical world, so to speak, the government said, well, we don't have any norms. We have to know what they are. So they said, well, you've got hundreds of bloods kicking around your lab there. Go ahead, and wherever 95% of the values fall, that's what we're going to call normal. Well, those people who had one foot in the grave, they had cancers, they had 5 medicines, they were sickos. If they had been smart, they would have taken hundreds of bloods from people with no symptoms and no medicines. Now we know that the cutoff for any disease, you can't heal anything from depression to heart failure to high blood pressure to cancers to osteoporosis without levels at around 80 to 100. And what we found in 50 years of looking at these levels is that 10,000 of D3, we use Carlson's, Monday through Friday for most people will do it. Others, if they haven't healed their gut yet, they need it every day. And so that brings them right up to snuff, really good levels.
That's interesting. As you and I, that's one place where we disagree.
We still are in the sun. I mean, I'm naturally blonde, and I do not wear sunscreen, and I play tennis in high noon for 2 hours at 85 degrees, and I don't wear sunscreen, and I don't burn because I believe it should.
So you agree with me about the sun is good.
Oh, absolutely. We try to get out there every day, yeah.
You should take vitamin D supplements as well. You don't get enough from the sun is basically what you say, which is what I like to believe, that you could get your vitamin D completely from the sun and from your diet.
Well, we see people from every hemisphere. I consult in Dubai, London, Singapore, Australia, all the states, all the Canadian provinces, and it doesn't matter if they're in Alaska or in Florida. People are low.
Oh, I know. Everyone's low, and I think that's because glyphosate and other chemicals are messing up the ability to activate vitamin D in the liver. The 5 enzymes get messed up by lots of poisons, and so the vitamin.
I wonder which ones.
Well, certainly aluminum and glyphosate. I know those two.
Yeah, we see a lot of aluminum. Of course, it's in everybody's coffee maker and their water heaters and the pots and pans when they eat out, etc.
Yeah, aluminum's another one. So aluminum, lead, arsenic.
Well, we look at all those. Aluminum, lead, cadmium, arsenic.
Cadmium.
And antimony we've been finding a lot of, and I can't find where that is yet.
Oh, I haven't looked at that.
Antimony. I don't know where that's coming from. That's my next...
Yeah, I know nothing about it. That's your next project, huh?
Well, one of many.
Such a big list. Wow.
Well, let me interject another controversial thing, which is what appears to be the spraying program of some government agency that I don't know who it is, but I mean, I look up at the sky. Some days I see nothing. Other days I see the sky crisscrossed with trails, and I don't know, And what I've heard from
big mystery, isn't it?
What I've heard from people that say they've studied it is there is a lot of nanoparticles of aluminum in the rain that comes down after one of those spraying episodes. Yeah. I don't know if I know that's a super controversial subject, but that could be a source of aluminum. Could be a source of is antimony? Is that what you call it?
Oh yeah, antimony.
I'm fascinated by that, and I'm frustrated that I can't quite get a clear picture from what I see on the web, because there certainly are a lot of so-called conspiracy theorists. They like to use that term.
I see a lot of people who think of it. What's the term they use it for? Anyway, they believe it's a big conspiracy, and it may well be. But we have to remember that one plane taking off gives the amount of exhaust chemicals comparable to 600 cars idling.
Wow.
That is really scary. I'm always nervous about flying on an airplane because I know the air in the plane is very toxic, and they often even use insecticides and whatnot inside the plane. I mean, that air is probably horribly toxic.
Oh yeah, when they hired me to lecture for 4 days in Australia one time, and I was warned by the fellow who lectured the year before me that they would come around and spray all of us before we landed.
Ugh.
And I've had them literally chase me down the aisles with their spray cans saying, it's harmless, it's harmless.
Oh, gosh.
And actually what I did was I brought a big plastic bag with me, and I put it over my whole body, and
good for you.
much to the dismay of my husband.
Oh, my God.
That's fun. Yeah, so...
But now it's in the air handling system. You can't do anything.
I've seen papers that talk about aluminum sulfate as a idea for climate change, to treat climate change, and I suspect there may be some kind of research going on somewhat.
Oh, right.
Where they're trying to manipulate the climate by spraying, which is crazy because they've got all these rules that are trying to restrict sulfur release into the air. They did all that. There was that law back in the 1980s, I think, that restricted sulfur emissions. And now if they're putting sulfate in the sky, it seems very strange because that's the opposite of sulfur, of trying to protect from sulfur emissions. So I'm very, very confused about what's going on with respect to...
Well, so are they.
Yeah.
One hand doesn't know what the other is doing. I mean,
exactly, because they do see that sulfate can have some interesting effects up in the stratosphere. So who knows what's going on with them,
Well, I mean, even the Flint, Michigan. I mean, what was their solution for these people whose children will probably grow up with at least a 10-point lower IQ than they would have had?
No, that's so...
And some of the parents will have cancers, blah, blah. Anyway, what was their solution? They gave them water in plastic bottles.
I know. That's really sad.
To make up for an EPA screw-up.
Yeah. Oh, I see that.
I really wonder about all this obsession with buying water in plastic bottles that's come on over the past 2 decades, People that become almost obsessed with buying plastic bottles of water.
Well, it causes you can see it readily on the cardioline because it causes an elevation of the odd-chain fatty acids.
Oh,
and
really?
It shows me that they need to dive into detoxify or die first, and then the high blood pressure hoax to get rid of it. Because, then, see, one of my big bugaboos is that a lot of people are not only low in zinc, which you can just follow 10 of the 300 enzymes and produce every disease you want, but a lot of them are low in RBC magnesium, which is totally different from the serum magnesium. Serum magnesium is worthless. It's the sign of a doctor who doesn't know anything because it's only 1% of the body mag.
Yeah,
and when we see these people, most people, even, my readers are very highly intelligent people. They're not your average Joe Blow. and even their levels of mag are dangerously low. Many times they're right where they would have a heart attack. And, 50% of the people who die of their first heart attack never had symptoms. They never had high cholesterol. They didn't have anything that would lead anyone to know about it. But they had low mag, and you can't resuscitate. You can sit there and do 600 joules of cardioversion all day long, and you'll never resuscitate a heart without enough magnesium. And so that's my big warning, is that never go into the detox protocols that are in Detoxify or Die until you have made sure that your RBC mag and your other nutrients that are so crucial and your detoxification pathways are up to snuff. Then you can get rid of the stuff.
Wow, so complicated.
I see something about antimony. It's used in fire retardant.
I know.
So automobile seat
but
cover.
TFOA is, Ken, and that's in the Teflon type stuff, and that, of course, lowers the iodine and then creates the epidemic of hypothyroidism that we see. I saw that, and I don't know how much,
Well, automobile seat covers, children's clothing.
Children's clothing, there's a big one.
And they say aircraft.
Aircraft.
Which covers everything.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
So
I looked through all that stuff, and nothing really did it for me in terms of, because then I go back and look at the environmental exposures that these people have had that would set them apart from the people who don't have high arsenic. And I can't find any tie-in yet.
Now, you mentioned arsenic earlier in connection with glyphosate. With Roundup. Is
Roundup,
arsenic an ingredient in glyphosate?
Yeah, in the inert.
In Roundup. Seralini found it.
Wow.
Found it. There's stuff in Roundup. There's lots of stuff in Roundup. In fact, Seralini thinks they're throwing in. They
are 2,4-D.
Oh, I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
Roundup, that's not supposed to be there.
I know, but it's a new name. I forget the name. Maybe Enduron or something like that. Anyway, what they have done is they have like a dozen different formulations. One is different for Hungary, is different from the one for Italy, is different from the one from France, etc. So they're all quite different. And again, the EPA or the FDA only tests the active ingredient, glyphosate.
Right. And they can put all kinds of shit in there, and nobody's going to care, which is really strange because
it's proprietary. Nobody can find it.
Well, in fact, they don't even know what's in it. According to Seralini, and I talked to him in person about this, he thinks that they get this residue when you take petroleum and you process it through all this stuff and you pull out all these things and make all these products, then you have this really, really toxic residue that's left over. And what are you going to do with that? Well, let's just throw it into Roundup because obviously it's toxic, so it'll kill the weeds, and that's where you're getting your arsenic. I believe that's what he thinks. That it's just coming in. It's like a complicated mess of all kinds of things, and nobody even knows.
Which they'll never unravel.
And they don't care what it is. They just put it in there because it's toxic, and they need to get rid of it anyway. So why not just put it into the Roundup?
Well, that's an
old. It makes it more deadly.
It's an old trick, isn't it? I mean, isn't that how we have fluoride in our drinking water?
Yes, it is. That's absolutely. I think you need to look at things where there's toxic residue that's building up from some factory, some plant, and then what are you going to do with that? Well, let's find a way to turn a positive spin on it, and get rid of it by dumping it somewhere. The fluoride is exactly that.
I've heard, and I need to double check this because I only got it from one source, but that actually gasoline itself was originally a waste product of the cracking process that the Rockefellers just dumped into rivers, and then they discovered they could use it as fuel.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, and then here's the point that connects with what you were both saying, is that the constitution of gasoline changes all the time based on what it is that they happen to be working on that day, cracking, because they're trying to get other valuable things out of the crude oil. And it may be nothing more than a waste disposal scheme. The way
it totally makes sense, doesn't it? If you're working in a factory and you're piling up all this waste disposal, what are you going to do with all this waste? It's going to build more and more every time you process stuff, right? You got to get rid of it. You got to find some way.
Well, so that's the way a lot of nutrients started. Resveratrol from grape seeds and skins, and et cetera. They all came from, quote, garbage that was thrown away that you didn't eat. So they realized that God doesn't make mistakes, only man. And so they looked at the phytonutrients that were in there and said, wow, some of this stuff like lutein is good for the eyes and blah, blah. On it went.
Yeah, interesting. Well, that was the one theory that I had heard from the chemtrails was that it was...
That's the word, chemtrails. Yeah.
Chemtrails, yeah, that's these lines in the sky.
That, among other things, it's a waste. It's a waste disposal scheme. That it was
a waste disposal scheme for airline fuel. So that's very similar to your thing about gasoline. That you've got this extra stuff that's coming out of, I think it was out of the phosphate manufacturing process. Which the fluoride comes out of there too. So I forget I think it might have been the phosphate manufacturing process that comes up with this nasty residue, which may be similar to what Seralini's talking about is going into the Roundup, just some crud left over from petroleum processing that you need to get rid of. So you just dump it into the gasoline. You put it into the airplane, fly it up in the air. You've gotten rid of it, right? Just burn it off. I mean, it's possible, isn't it? That's just like, we've got this waste, how are we going to get rid of it? Let's just dump it into the gas, as long as it still flies, right?
Well, I mean,
I don't know whether this is true or not, but this was one theory that I found on the web.
But what could be crazier than putting fluoride in drinking water, and yet they do that?
I know.
Right?
I know.
I mean,
it's crazy. It's not just fluoride, it's this really toxic form of fluoride that comes out of that waste from the phosphate manufacturing.
Did you see where some physicians had sued a locality and said, okay, you want to put fluoride in? Great. We want a law that says you put in pharmaceutical grade fluoride. And we'll go along with that, and it didn't work. They said no.
Well, besides, there are no studies that actually show that it helped in terms of dental problems.
Well, the idea is that they claim it's for dental health, but what it really is waste disposal. And so raising, forcing the issue and saying, okay, it's therapeutic, let's put in pharmaceutical grade. And they said, oh, no, we can't do that.
Right. We won't be able to get rid of our toxic buildup.
Yeah, we can't afford it. We can't afford to put,
But that brings us down to the actual person, because that's the bottom line here is how can we make people better?
Yep.
And they need to know there are only two causes,
Right. And how do we get people to be ethical and to understand that that it's wrong to poison the world,
Well, that's why I've written 15 books and 30 years of a monthly newsletter trying to change people who want to change. The problem is a lot of people don't want responsibility for their health. They want some doctor, some insurance company, or some government to make them healthy, but they do not want to read or take responsibility.
I think they're afraid to, because then if they start to be in conflict with their doctor, then they've got a situation they're not happy about, right? They don't know whether
the people who are well are happy. I mean, we have people who were given 48 hours to live with metastatic cancers, and they're not my patients, so I'm not bragging. And when I heard about them, I contacted them. They sent me suitcases of their records proving everything, every oncology record, etc., the x-rays, blood tests, and then they even came to my house and let me examine them so that I knew that everything was on the up and up. And plus they're in the newsletters. People can talk to them, and they're like 20 years older now, and they were given like weeks to live with wildly metastatic cancers, and all the oncologists threw up their arms and said, there's nothing more we can do for you. And they did it with diet.
Yeah, I totally believe it.
And so Sherry, for you, everything begins with the cardioion test, and then an educated analysis of that test.
Well, the thing is, why work blindly when you have some tools where you can see the two main causes? The two causes of all disease: the nutrient levels go down, the toxicity levels go up. And so everybody is low in all sorts of things because of the food manufacturing, etc., our detoxification every day of medications, foods, our environment. And so this uses up detox nutrients big time, and that creates enormous stress on the body. So when we can fix that, then they're that much further ahead. So then you start getting rid of the toxins.
So the nutrients provide the raw materials to eliminate the toxins from the body.
Right. You know, like I said, I mean, if you don't have enough magnesium, and then you jump in a sauna and sweat out the last molecule, you can have a heart attack, and that's it. Nobody knows what happened to you. So you definitely want to start with a full deck.
Now, right now, the number...
I imagine you insist on an organic diet, I hope, I would assume.
Yep.
Right now, the number of people who can skillfully analyze the cardioion is pretty limited.
We're looking. We keep looking, because I would rather be on the tennis court. But I can. In fact, even when I closed my office after 40 years, 10 years ago, I did not sell my practice because there's nobody I would have sold it to. I wouldn't trust anybody, so I just closed it instead. You know, I lost a lot of money, but screw it. I just can't. And we're looking desperately. In fact, the end of this year, we have a 25-question test in the newsletter with the answers in the following month. Because if we find any doctors who can get 92 on the test, we'll put them in the newsletter, because our readers in 24 countries would love to know about people who know this kind of chemistry.
Is there any? Is it feasible to train somebody, or is the scope of the training, would it just be too huge?
Well, there are some doctors now who they take some of them every week. They take like their 3 worst patients or whatever. Some of them I think they're well, but they're not. And then they actually paid for their cardioion, and they have the person on the line with the doctor, and then I interpret it for them, and then tell them what to take. And so that some of these doctors are trying to learn how to do it and help their patients at the same time, and so that's a great way to learn.
Oh, great!
That's a really good program. That's an excellent idea.
Great. So you have
because I've given over 100 lectures to physicians, CME courses, and lectured at Oxford, etc. And there's only so much they can learn in a while. So it would take like a week to go, at least 4 days, to go through a lot of that chemistry. And by that time, you can see their eyes glazing over. It's not a good...
It's amazing, isn't it, to have to learn all of that in a short term, a period of time. I mean, you've been accumulating that knowledge over all these years, and with a desperate need because of your illness. We were really motivated to learn, you know?
I was. I've been in wheelchairs. I totaled 5 cars when I did it. I broke my back 6 times jumping horses, blew out knees, shoulders, elbows. I'm fine. No medicines, no symptoms, and I play tennis.
Is it essential for them to know the chemistry at the level that you two do, or could there be a practicum where they say, well, this level indicates that we need to do some of this? No, they really need to know the chemistry.
You skip so much important stuff.
Okay.
It's like, say they see an elevated quinolinate. Most doctors, 99.999%, don't even know what it is. It's a sign that the brain is deteriorating, and it can be before the person has any symptoms whatsoever. So it's wonderful. So then on the cheat sheet that comes with it, that is highly inadequate, it misses 80% of what they need, it says B6. Well, if he doesn't know enough chemistry, he won't know that B6 doesn't work in the human body until it's converted to its active form, pyridoxal 5-phosphate. And it only can do that if you have enough zinc. And so you see how it just everything backs up and whatnot.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it has to be predicated on, well, how good are the fatty acids in the brain? So are your eicosapentaenoic docosahexaenoic levels, which you find in cod liver oil, are they over 200 as they should be, or are they way down at 50, which it says is normal on the test? And again, if like some cardiologists are starting to learn that omega-3 oils are essential for healing cardiac disease, but they're so friggin' lazy and stupid that then they tell people to go out and get any old fish oil, which the Journal of Nutritional Biochemistry in February showed that a lot of them, the best quality ones, are esterified and they don't work at all. But then they totally are ignorant of the fact that if you don't have the anchor for the fatty acids in the cell membrane, then they're not going to attach. And you have to have enough acetyl-carnitine to carry the fats Then you have to have enough phosphatidylcholine and serine to anchor it down. They're never going to learn that kind of stuff unless they're really motivated.
Right.
Hey, we're coming up on an hour, and I wanted to give you a chance to say, "Hey, I got to go." but
Yeah.
Well, that's okay. We've enjoyed this, Ken, and I don't know what you're going to do with it, but
well,
you have my blessings to use it however you want. Tell people to go to prestigepublishing.com or 1-800. What is it? 846-6687. Prestigepublishing.com, and they can find all the books and newsletters and get themselves well. I'm very blessed, like I say. I get letters from readers that say, my husband and I are 98 and 86, and we have no medicines and no symptoms. Thank you. We're avid readers.
Wow.
So, it just depends on what you're
98-year-old and 96-year-old in the country that take no medicines, probably.
I know.
I have the number.
Well, I just got a letter from a guy who says, thank you, Dr. Rogers. I'm an avid reader, and I just finished my 5K. I'm not sure I know how far 5K is, and I'm sure I probably couldn't run it. But anyway, and I'm 86.
Wow. Wow. I have that number as 800-846-6687. Does that sound right?
That's it. I think that's
great.
it. Yeah, prestigepublishing.com. I think somebody told me, I never do internet, and as you know, Ken.
Yes.
I don't do internet, Facebook, and Twitter, and all those things. I just don't have the time. I learned a long time ago that I can either be a slave to one of these little machines that my husband gave me, who is very techy, fortunately, because I'm not. I'm a dinosaur. Or I can spend my days reading molecular biochemistry, and since that's what fuels me, that's how I do it. So I don't do the other stuff. But anyway, they told me that if you go to Amazon and just start writing detox, it'll come Detoxify or Die. Should come.
Yeah, or your name. A lot of your books come up on Amazon just with your name.
Oh, really? Okay.
Sherry Rogers. Yeah.
We've never advertised in 50 years, so I have no idea. I don't know what.
Yeah.
We only sell knowledge. People have asked me to make nutrients, but I think it's unethical for me to be hawking nutrients that I have devised. And besides, they're highly individual when we go over the cardio-ions with people, so there's really...
everything has to be custom tailored to each individual.
And that's going to be a big problem, because that comes down to money and intellect, the two things that people want to ignore.
Hey, one last question, and Dr. Seneff is the perfect person to ask this question to. Is there a way to take Sherry's knowledge and computerize it? Because I don't know if you know this, Dr. Rogers, but Dr. Seneff is a Ph.D. in computer science from MIT and a senior scientist there, so she knows her way around the computer. Could it be done? Could we take Sherry's brain and put it into a machine? If then, if this, then that. If this, then that. With all kinds of logic trees and everything.
It depends on so many things, though.
Yeah.
I know. I understand design.
I gave simple examples, but there are a lot more obtuse, far-reaching. I mean, even every symptom. Take any simple symptom that you can think of. You can have a differential diagnosis as long as your arm.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's why...
So you can weed that stuff out, a lot of the possibilities, by what I do, devouring their last 6 years or 3 years of records and my questionnaire, and then the cardio-ion, and talking with them, and then that rules out a lot of stuff. Then you can narrow it down. I mean, think of it this way. Say a guy has atrial fibrillation, which is epidemic now, absolutely epidemic. And you can cause atrial fibrillation with Roundup, mercury high fructose corn syrup, phthalates, zinc deficiency, insulin resistance, trans fats, etc., leaky gut. But what if you've gone through all of that stuff and he still has atrial fib, and it began 2 years ago? What else happened 2 years ago? Oh, well, that's when I got my dental implant. And what acupuncture meridian is that one in? Oh, it's right where the heart is. So you see, there's endless but that's what going through all of this helps me fine-tune and narrow it down to the specific person.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's unfortunately the case that everything is extremely complicated in any given...
Yeah, and medicine wants one dose for all.
Well, let me throw out a crazy idea, and this is just an idea. What if the results were anonymous, of course, but the results of all your analysis, all your patient analysis were put into a computer. So in other words, okay, I received this cardio ion, and these were my conclusions.
I did that.
Oh, you've done
I did that.
Oh.
In How to Cure Diabetes, I took the most common deficiencies we've seen in hundreds of people over the last 2 decades. That's what I did in How to Cure Diabetes.
Okay.
So that at least for a person who could only afford a $20 book instead of whatever the cardio ion goes for now, they could at least start to fix and read the chemistry and understand what they're doing and what their goal is.
Got it.
Yeah, I had that same idea, Ken, I think.
So they can make an educated guess, better than a stab in the dark.
It's better than nothing.
Yeah, better than nothing for sure.
There is a lot of work going on right now at MIT and elsewhere where they're getting hold of medical records from various sources and using computers too.
I know, but then the person interpreting them, that's the hooker. Because I've seen a lot of that. Well,
the computer can do some interpretation completely blindly, and I think that is a way to uncover interesting links that we hadn't noticed.
But it's only as smart as the data that they put in, and they don't know enough to put the right stuff in.
Totally. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do, and there's lots of pitfalls and whatnot. But I do think that, and analyzing a massive, even just analyzing the metabolome of the gut, like all of the microbes growing in the gut, and looking at all the enzymes that they're expressing, not actually finding the microbes, but just finding the enzymes. That can be very interesting.
Now they
already know, that we have 9 times more genetic material in our gut than we do in our whole body. So that's a huge.
They would look for the enzymes because the enzymes will tell you which creatures are in there.
No, they don't even care about. They may not. They would maybe like to know the creatures, but they're not looking for which creatures. They're just looking for which enzymes. So they're looking at enzymes that might be expressed by multiple creatures, and just seeing which enzymes are expressed more, which ones are expressed less, and that's giving you a sort of metabolic profile of activity of the entire gut microbiome as a unit.
Well, that brings us to another thing, because a lot of people, when we do the cardio ion, we see that their D-arabinitol, for example, is elevated. Well, the normal body can make about 22, 23 of D-arabinitol and units, and then after that, it's made by something else living in you, usually a fungus, Sporobolomyces geotricum. I had my own mycology lab because I was an allergist, among other things, and so we do a stool study to look at what's growing and then what it's sensitive to and what it's a waste of time to give to get rid of it. Plus, it shows us their secretory IgA, the main antibody in the gut, because a lot of people, the secretory IgA is way below normal. They can't fight anything off until they fix their chemistry.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. Wow.
And then we see other things like an elevated tricarballate, which is one organic acid from Candida and other organisms. Sometimes it's from some of the common bacteria like Klebsiella and Citrobacter. Anyway, they'll have an elevated tricarballate, and I published a medical paper on it as well. What that does is it chelates out magnesium so that no matter how much you take, you can't get enough in your body to stop you from having a heart attack or high blood pressure or atrial fib or whatever. Same thing with lots of other. The indican can be elevated when a lot of the bugs are around the opening of the pancreas, and that's why they have elevated insulin, and they have poor digestion, etc.
And this is another example where it's a quality of test that's generally not given to the average person. You have to know it exists.
Oh, absolutely.
And you have to be able to interpret it, because people will just not know. The doctor sees this thing's elevated and they have no clue what it is.
Oh, every single person that I've ever consulted with who has shown it to their doctor, he's either said, I don't know anything about it, which is honest, or he said, oh, this is junk, and thrown it in the basket.
Oh, my goodness.
That's frustrating.
Wow.
Well, your knowledge definitely needs to be captured. I'm glad that you're doing this. I think that's really outstanding, this program you have of
Well, we owe you a lot for uncovering all these hidden things that are going on with even just one product that is universally used in every country and on our major foods.
Yeah, I think it's the most damaging chemical in our environment today because it's so pervasive and it's so carelessly used.
Well, I didn't drive the tractor and spray Roundup, but I did atrazine, and that's it's either number one or two.
Really
they go hand in hand.
Yeah, no, atrazine is very bad also, and of course it's not used as much, but it maybe will be once glyphosate no longer works.
Well, we grew 1,000 acres of corn, among many things.
Oh, my. Oh, that's interesting, and you used atrazine on it.
Oh, I was drenched in it from head to toe.
Oh, that's got to be amazing.
Oh, my gosh, I could tell you horror stories. But anyway.
Oh, gosh.
In fact, I ended up with like 12 rocky, hard, painful breast cysts in my early 30s. I had a uterine fibroid the size of an egg. So I did our cancer program, the macro trilogy. I did the 3 macro books, and in 5 months they were all gone.
That's macrobiotic diet.
Yeah, you start with You Are What You Ate, then you go to The Cure is in the Kitchen, and then Macro Mellow. You just ask for the macro trilogy. It's the 3. And then people who are really serious about their cancers, they'll also read Wellness Against All Odds because in there, for example, we showed that, did you ever wonder why cancer cells are not gobbled up by the immune system like a staph or a strep is? Because they're smarter. They secrete a sialoglycoprotein, a coating, a suit of armor around them that covers up their antigenic recognition sites, so they're literally invisible to the immune system. But as Harvard researchers showed 3 decades ago, and they've still been ignored because there's no drug for it, if you dissolve it off with enzymes, which we show people to do in Wellness Against All Odds, then the cancer cells lie naked in the breeze and the immune system gobbles them up.
I love that. That's great. Wow.
And, of course, like the phthalates lower vitamin A, and what do you need A for? To reprogram the P53 cancer gene that is designed by God to kill cancer cells, but when it's mutated by environmental chemicals, the P53 now loses its wild, normal form.
Thank you for getting us together.
Oh,
quite fascinating.
What a treat. Oh, and if only we could put her brain into a computer system.
We need all that knowledge, and she's gonna.
I mean, as she points out, a lot of it is in all her books. I mean, she has been very methodical about.
Truly.
And you only have 3 of them. She's got, I think, about 12.
I saw that. Yeah, I've been looking through her books. Thank you, by the way, for the books, and I'm really loving that cancer book. I've almost read the whole thing.
Fascinating, isn't it?
The 4th book you sent me.
What she had to go through to treat herself?
Oh, so she actually used that cancer book as a starting point because it's not her book.
No, I mean the lady, the lady who had to treat herself.
Oh, yes, I know. You read the cancer book, I assume, right?
What a narrative.
Oh, I know. It was just incredible, wasn't it? What guts she had to just go ahead and decide to try this thing just because she read something,
And she points
really walking a tight wire.
She points out something that the people in the autism community experience too. When you try to go your own way, you get attacked by your doctors, by your family members. I heard a talk by I always forget her name, but she's a naturopathic doctor in Ohio, and she provides consulting to cancer patients, helping them go through the process. And she says one of the biggest challenges is the doctors try to railroad them into chemo on day 1, and then the families will throw a fit if they don't comply.
Yeah. The doctors put the fear of God in you, and it's like there's no choice. And then all your family members are pressuring you to get this done. You don't even have time to think because you've been surprised by the diagnosis, right? You just rush into it, and it's terrible. It's really terrible.
Well, I heard a panel not long ago where a doctor just admitted that that's how they were trained, do not give the patients any time to think about chemo. Get them on it right away, because if they think about it and do any research, they're going to hesitate and try to do something else.
It's so interesting to me how we've settled into this protocol, like this really strict protocol about how you treat something. that the doctors don't dare deviate from, because if they deviate and something goes wrong, it's their fault. As long as they stick with the protocol and something goes wrong, that's okay because it's not their fault, right?
Yep.
You know?
Absolutely.
They're following the rules, so they're blameless.
I mean, it's a brilliantly
doesn't take blame either. They're like, oh well, it didn't work. You're dead. That's not my problem.
Right. It's God's fault.
Yeah.
It's a brilliantly diabolical system, and I know what I'm about to say is so totally obvious, but it still dawns on me every day. The only thing that penetrates this medical system are things that make money. And not just money, but big money. If it doesn't make big money, it's not going to penetrate the system.
Yeah, and the less money it makes, the more it's going to be attacked, right? Like Carrie's stuff with the chlorine dioxide.
Yeah. And then parallel to that, any product that makes big money that is contributing to health problems also is defended, and anybody that questions it is also attacked.
Right.
So
drugs are a good example.
Yeah, it's just this big money game.
Yeah, really sad, isn't it? It's strange to me that we've managed to get to this point in our society.
Well, I just wonder if it's inevitable with size. The bigger organizations get, the more wildly corrupt they seem to get. The Pentagon, not to cast aspersions on anyone's religion, but the Roman Catholic Church. The bigger these things get, the more crazy they get.
Yeah, and also when there is a consistent message out of a huge resource that something is good, then it's hard for you to say, oh, it's bad, right? You get brainwashed by disinformation coming from all directions because everyone wants the money, so they're going to go ahead and continue with the disinformation.
Also, the level of...
You just have a hard time believing it's not true.
Yeah, absolutely. And the level of organization behind the misinformation, that I'm getting new insight into daily. I mean, it's not random. In fact, I'll send you this video. It's not related directly to health, but it's related to what I consider the global warming hysteria. Now, I believe that fossil fuels are horrible. I've always believed that. So I'm not against that. I am against assuming that the climate is changing in a particular way for a particular reason. I mean, but the reason I'm against it is because here's their solution. Here's the solution of this group that I've been tracking. Well, since we're having global warming, we need GMO foods because it's the only way we can survive with the changing climate. And there's a group, you'll probably see a lot of them in the news. Their figurehead right now is this 14-year-old girl from Sweden who's clearly a manufactured character. I mean, she's a real person, but it's a group. It's a group called what do you call it? When Extinction Rebellion. Keep your eyes out for that. And I found one of their internal training videos of how they train their members to manipulate social media and to get across their message. And they're one of the ones that says the world's coming to an end, so we need GMO foods. I mean, they don't make it that clear, right? They kind of shuffle.
That's their whole idea, is to link the GMOs as to be part of the solution. Right?
Exactly. That's the ultimate goal. But the front end goal is to get us all hysterical in fear, so that we'll accept anything. But what's so interesting is somehow they allowed this training video to be put up on the web, and it shows that this is not a grassroots group. This is an incredibly sophisticated. This is a group with almost PhD level in social manipulation skills, and they're training their members how to tell the story and how to fake things on social media and how to make a small protest look like it's huge. It's quite amazing.
Wow.